This video is a little different in some ways to most of my videos and highlights the very sad and dangerous reality that many Filipinas and Filipinos in general face each and every day in the Philippines. What I'm about to tell you here impacted me in a way that I'll never forget, and 8 years later I still feel my desperation for my wife deep inside my soul like it was yesterday. Sometimes living in the Philippines for many can be literally a life and death struggle each and every day. And I'm not just talking about not having money or food here. This is something that every foreign guy who's looking to be in a relationship with a Filipina needs to be aware of. So be sure to buckle up and stay with me here. Before I dive into the nitty-gritty of this very important video, if you enjoy the channel or find value in it, then be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out in the future. Now, it's not until us foreign guys actually go to the Philippines and experience what life is like there that we truly appreciate the dangers and struggles that many will have in their lives. You can be sure that most of us are very spoilt in comparison, where we have safe and comfortable housing, a job that pays reasonably well so we can eat 3 square meals a day. It all seems reasonably fair to us that we work hard for a good day's pay that allows us to live a certain lifestyle. Well, I'm here to tell you that in the Philippines, this isn't the case for the vast majority of people. They can work very hard there, but we will see their pay as being substandard, which means the way they live may also be seen as substandard and can in fact pose many dangers on a daily basis that you or I could never fully appreciate. That is, until we're there experiencing it firsthand. We all know that housing in the Philippines is an issue, and this is especially so in the major cities. As you walk around the cities, you'll see many homeless people living in the parks, along beachfronts, and even in the city streets. Most of those people may have no real income and can be scratching just to get a few pesos a day to survive. And they certainly don't earn enough money to be able to rent a house or an apartment. Throughout the major cities there are what they call boarding houses, and there are many of them. In these boarding houses, many working people may live. Even though they work hard and have a full-time job, many still can't afford to rent a house or an apartment. And so they seek out a boarding house as their only real option. Now, for many of us guys, we may think that a boarding house could be a great option, and I wouldn't criticise you for thinking this, because that was my thoughts when I first found out my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was living in such a boarding house in the back streets of Makati. At 4,000 pesos a month, it seemed to be reasonable rent, which my wife split with her sister. So that was around $40 each a month. I thought that's a bargain price, and it was only a 15-minute walk to her work. Over the first few months where we were chatting online, I never gave it a second thought. That was until I got on a plane and went to meet her in the Philippines. I booked myself into the Euratel Hotel in Makati, which was a comfortable and affordable hotel, before quickly asking my wife to show me where she lives. So we walked down some back streets of Makati, past where there was an open sewerage system that smelt unbelievably bad, and then found myself standing outside a very old and run-down building. My wife said that we were here as she opened the front door, which had narrow old wooden stairs leading up to the first floor. I then looked down a long corridor where there were rooms on either side, and my wife showed me into the room that her and her sister were sharing. It was no bigger than a small-sized bedroom, with no ventilation, and the heat and humidity inside that room was almost like a furnace. I know for sure that in my country, such a building would be deemed unsafe and would be demolished. As I was sitting on a thin mattress on the floor where my wife and sister would sleep, I was feeling claustrophobic and started to have trouble breathing. I remember looking around and thinking how this boarding house is nothing more than a death trap waiting to explode into an inferno. One spark, and I have no doubt that many lives, including my wife and her sister, would be gone. Right here, I realised that this was not their first choice. And yes, they know and understand what can happen living in such a place, because other boarding houses have gone up in flames in that same area around Makati which my wife was very aware of. You can be sure that this was their only choice at that time if they didn't want to be living on the streets. Both my wife and her sister left the province in search of work in the big city to try and make something of their lives, just as many other province women do throughout the Philippines. My wife and sister were both lucky enough to be able to find a good job as CCTV security guards in a big company, but still only earned around 12,000 pesos at that time in 2014 a month. Now that works out around $300 a month. One must understand that many such Filipinas will be forced into these boarding houses that, as I say, are death traps, where they know that their lives are in danger at any moment. One careless person in another room that falls asleep with a cigarette in their hand could spell the end for everyone living in that building. Not to mention, the door to the room my wife and sister were living in didn't lock properly, and anyone at any time could easily just walk right in and do God knows what to both those women. In the end, I lasted maybe 15 or 20 minutes in that room, but the thoughts of what could happen became too much for me, and I asked my Filipina if we could now go. Over the course of my vacation, I continued with my Filipina to have a wonderful time together and really get to know one another on a more deeper and personal level. But every day that boarding house was weighing heavily on my mind. By the time I arrived home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being extremely worried, and of course, our relationship had gone to the next level from meeting her, spending quality time together, and I felt very positive about our future together. So in order to ease my mind and to help my wife and sister, I helped them to move into an apartment. My wife and sister would still pay the usual 4,000 pesos rent a month, and I added another 4,000 a month so they could be in a much safer home. Make no mistake here, this was as much for me as it was for my wife and her sister, because I needed to be able to sleep at night, which was impossible knowing the dangers that they were facing at every moment that they lived there. Now, as I say, my wife's situation here is not unique. Many Filipinas will live in such rundown and dangerous boarding houses throughout the Philippines. It can be a real shock when you first experience where they're living and how little they have despite having a good job and working hard. But this is the reality for many. These people living in those places fully understand what can happen, but they're left feeling helpless around what other options they may have and what they can afford. So when you finally get to the Philippines to meet your Filipina, always ask her to take you and show you where she lives. Some will do this gladly and others may try to avoid taking you there, but in that case, you should insist. Then be sure to have a good look at the place for any such dangers, and if they're there, then be sure to help her out in a small way to secure something a bit safer. It doesn't have to be luxurious, just safer. And as I said earlier, for me, it was only 4,000 pesos a month, which was very affordable, and in the event that our relationship never lasted, I would have been happy to pay the rent each month until the lease expired. It's sad that many Filipinas and Filipinos in general live in such conditions, and certainly it should make all us foreign guys grateful for the life we have. And if we can help to make a Filipina's life a little better as your relationship grows, then that's a fantastic feeling, I can assure you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.